Officer Bradley Jenkins smiled a crooked, satisfied smile as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around the wrists of the quiet man in the faded grey hoodie. Bradley thought he had just bagged another easy arrest to boost his monthly quota, just another guy who didn't belong in this wealthy neighborhood. But as he roughly shoved the silent man into the back of his police cruiser, he missed the cold, calculating glint in his captive's eyes. Bradley didn't know it yet, but this nobody wasn't just completely innocent. He was the worst possible person a corrupt, bullying cop could ever target. In exactly 2 hours, Bradley's entire career, his freedom, and his arrogant worldview were going to be violently ripped apart by a fleet of black SUVs. The morning sun over Oak Ridge, a notoriously affluent and insular suburb in the Pacific Northwest, was bright and deceptive. It was the kind of Tuesday morning where the streets were lined with manicured lawns, luxury SUVs, and people walking golden retrievers. To Officer Bradley Jenkins, a 12-year veteran of the Oak Ridge Police Department, it was his kingdom. Bradley was a man who wore his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a heavy club to swing at anyone he deemed unworthy of his town. Broad-shouldered, with a tightly clipped buzz cut, and eyes that always seemed to be searching for a reason to be angry, he had a reputation. He was the cop who had accumulated over a dozen citizen complaints, ranging from excessive force to blatant racial profiling, all of which had been conveniently swept under the rug by a complacent police union and a precinct captain who prioritized arrest statistics over civil rights. Sitting in the passenger seat of the patrol cruiser was rookie officer Toby Harrison. Toby was only 3 months out of the academy, a nervous, idealistic 23-year-old who was quickly learning that the reality of policing under Bradley Jenkins was a nightmare. Toby kept his mouth shut, his eyes glued to the passing storefronts, praying for a quiet shift. "Look at this," Bradley suddenly sneered, tapping the steering wheel with a thick finger. He slowed the cruiser down to a crawl as they approached the high-end artisanal coffee shop on Elmwood Avenue. Toby blinked, leaning forward to follow Bradley's gaze. "Look at what? The coffee shop?" "Not the shop, rookie. The curb." Parked legally in a 2-hour spot was a nondescript, late-model, dark blue sedan. Sitting in the driver's seat, with the window rolled down to let in the crisp morning air, was a black man in his early 50s. He wore a simple, faded grey-hooded sweatshirt and a dark baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He was holding a small paper cup of espresso in one hand and scrolling methodically through a tablet with the other. He wasn't playing loud music. He wasn't looking around nervously. He was simply existing, enjoying a quiet morning. But to Bradley, his mere presence was a glaring anomaly. "Out-of-state plates, Virginia," Bradley noted, his voice dropping into a low, predatory register. Sitting there for God knows how long. Casing the joint, probably. Doesn't belong in this zip code. Toby shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Brad? He's just drinking coffee. The shop just opened. Maybe he's just taking a break before a drive." "You're naive, Harrison," Bradley snapped, sharply turning the steering wheel and pulling the cruiser up directly behind the blue sedan. He hit the switch for the emergency lights. The red and blue strobes violently shattered the peaceful morning ambiance, reflecting off the storefront windows. People who look like that, dressing like a thug in a neighborhood where houses cost $3 million? They're up to something. Let's go see what our friend is hiding. In the blue sedan, Arthur Pendleton let out a slow, exhausted sigh as the flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. Arthur was 52 years old, and he was profoundly tired. He had just flown in from Washington, D.C. after a grueling 72-hour operation. As the deputy director of the FBI's National Security Branch, Arthur had spent the last 3 days coordinating a multi-agency takedown of a massive domestic cyber-terrorism ring. He had come to Oak Ridge on a rare 48-hour leave to attend his niece's high school graduation. He was a man who commanded thousands of federal agents, a man who briefed the President of the United States on Tuesday mornings. Right now, however, he just wanted to drink his overpriced macchiato, review a few unclassified briefings on his tablet, and go to his sister's house. He watched in the side mirror as the heavy-set patrol officer stepped out of the cruiser, resting his hand, casually but deliberately, on the butt of his service weapon. Arthur's highly trained eyes picked up every micro-expression, every aggressive nuance in the officer's posture. He recognized the swagger immediately. It was the swagger of a man who believed a badge granted him absolute immunity. Arthur calmly set his coffee in the cup holder. He pressed the power button on his tablet, slipping it onto the passenger seat. He didn't reach into his pockets. He didn't make any sudden movements. He simply rested both hands visibly on the top of the steering wheel and waited. He had spent his entire life navigating the sharp edges of the world, and despite his immense power and authority, he knew exactly how dangerous a bad cop with a chip on his shoulder could be. "Morning," Bradley barked as he reached the driver's side window. He didn't bother offering a polite greeting. He leaned in close, deliberately invading Arthur's personal space, trying to intimidate him. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Right now." Arthur turned his head, his expression unreadable, his voice calm and deep. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem? Was I parked illegally?" "I ask the questions," Bradley snapped, annoyed that the man wasn't immediately trembling or fumbling over his words. "I said, license and registration. Do you have a hearing problem?" Arthur didn't flinch. "I'm perfectly willing to provide my identification, officer. However, as I'm parked legally and the engine is off, I am simply inquiring as to the reasonable, articulable suspicion for this detainment. Are you investigating a specific crime?" Toby, who had walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle, swallowed hard. Oh no, he thought. He knows the law. Brad is going to lose his mind. Bradley's face flushed a deep, ugly red. His jaw clenched. To Bradley, a black man asking about his constitutional rights was the ultimate insult. It was a direct challenge to his authority. "You want suspicion?" Bradley sneered, leaning closer. "My suspicion is that there's been a rash of burglaries in this area, and you fit the description of a suspect we're looking for." It was a blatant lie. Toby knew it. Arthur, trained in interrogation and deception detection, knew it instantly. There had been no burglaries in Oak Ridge in 3 months. "I see," Arthur said evenly. He slowly reached into the console, pulling out his rental agreement, and then reached into his back pocket, extracting his civilian leather wallet. He deliberately bypassed the inner breast pocket of his jacket, where his heavy gold FBI credentials rested. A part of Arthur, the tired uncle, wanted to flash the badge, pull rank, and watch the arrogant cop pale and apologize. But another part of him, the seasoned investigator who despised corruption, wanted to see exactly how far this officer was willing to go. Arthur knew that if this cop was doing this to him, a middle-aged man quietly drinking coffee, he was absolutely doing it to young kids, to innocent people who didn't have the power to fight back. Arthur decided, in that split second, to let Officer Bradley Jenkins dig his own grave. He handed over his Virginia driver's license. "Arthur Pendleton," Bradley read aloud, his tone dripping with disdain. "Long way from home, Artie. What are you doing in Oak Ridge?" "Visiting family," Arthur replied. "And my name is Mr. Pendleton." Bradley's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Step out of the vehicle." The morning air seemed to grow colder. Toby stepped back from the passenger window, his hand hovering near his radio. "Brad," Toby muttered across the roof of the car. "We got the ID. He's clear. Let's just run it and go." "Shut up, Harrison," Bradley ordered, without looking away from Arthur. "I told you to step out of the vehicle, Pendleton. Now." "Officer," Arthur said, his voice maintaining that maddeningly steady, calm cadence. "You have my identification, you have my rental agreement. I am not a flight risk, and I am not a threat. Ordering me out of the car escalates a situation that requires no escalation. I ask you again, what specific crime do you suspect me of committing?" "Refusal to obey a lawful order," Bradley shouted, stepping back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. The threat was explicit. "Get out of the damn car before I pull you out!" Arthur looked at the officer's hand hovering over the gun. He calculated the variables. He was a high-level federal agent, but right now he was just a man in a hoodie facing down an armed, unstable local cop. The safest play was compliance, followed by absolute, devastating legal retribution. "All right," Arthur said softly. "I am stepping out of the vehicle." He opened the door slowly and stepped onto the pavement. He was slightly taller than Bradley, standing at 6'2", with a broad, athletic build maintained by strict federal fitness standards. Bradley, feeling instantly threatened by Arthur's physical presence, grabbed Arthur roughly by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him face first against the side of the blue sedan. "Hands on the roof! Spread your legs!" Bradley yelled. Arthur gritted his teeth as his jaw hit the cold metal of the car, but he complied, spreading his arms and legs. Bradley kicked Arthur's ankles further apart, unnecessarily rough. "Officer Harrison," Arthur spoke loudly, ensuring the rookie could hear him. "I want you to note that I am fully compliant, offering zero physical resistance, and your partner has just initiated a physical assault without probable cause." "Shut your mouth," Bradley snarled, beginning a rough, invasive pat-down. He felt up and down Arthur's legs, grabbed his waist, and patted down the outside of his grey hoodie. He felt the civilian wallet in the back pocket, but, crucially, failed to pat down the heavier inner breast pocket of the jacket underneath the hoodie. Bradley was angry and sloppy, operating on pure adrenaline and prejudice rather than police training. "You got any weapons on you? Needles? Anything that's going to stick me?" Bradley demanded, pressing his forearm hard against the back of Arthur's neck. "I have no weapons," Arthur stated, "and you are currently applying excessive force." "I'll show you excessive force, you arrogant—" Bradley trailed off, pulling Arthur's arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs echoed on the quiet street. Bradley clamped the steel cuffs around Arthur's wrists, tightening them a few notches past what was necessary, ensuring they bit painfully into the skin. Toby walked around the back of the car, his face pale. "Brad, what are we arresting him for?" "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, failure to comply," Bradley listed off rapidly, thoroughly enjoying the feeling of absolute power. He spun Arthur around to face him. "You thought you could come into my town and act like you own the place. You thought you could talk back to me. You're going to spend the next 48 hours in a concrete box, Artie. Let's see how smart you sound then." Arthur looked at Bradley. There was no fear in Arthur's eyes. There wasn't even anger. There was only a cold, clinical observation. It was the look a scientist gives a particularly nasty insect before dropping it into a jar of formaldehyde. "Officer Jenkins," Arthur said, reading the man's name tag. "I want to be very clear with you. I am officially invoking my right to remain silent from this point forward regarding your fabricated charges. However, I highly suggest you reconsider this course of action. If you put me in the back of that cruiser, you will cross a line from which your career will not recover." Bradley threw his head back and let out a barking laugh. "Are you threatening me? Add threatening a police officer to the charges. Get in the car." Bradley grabbed the back of Arthur's hoodie and marched him toward the cruiser. He opened the rear door and, instead of guiding him in, shoved Arthur hard. Arthur awkwardly fell onto the hard plastic back seat, his cuffed hands trapped painfully beneath him. Bradley slammed the door shut and turned to Toby, a massive grin on his face. "See, rookie, that's how you handle these types. You show them who the alpha is right from the start. They back down every time." Toby swallowed the lump in his throat, looking through the wire mesh at the man in the back seat. Arthur had managed to sit himself upright. He was staring straight ahead. He didn't look like a man who had backed down. He looked like a man who was waiting for a timer to reach 0. "Let's get him processed," Bradley said, strutting around to the driver's seat. As the patrol car pulled away from Elmwood Avenue, leaving the blue rental car sitting alone by the curb, Arthur sat in silence. The steel cuffs dug into his wrists, sending sharp pains up his forearms. He ignored it. His mind was already miles away, calculating the logistics of the bureaucratic apocalypse he was about to unleash upon the Oak Ridge Police Department. The drive to the Oak Ridge precinct took 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, Bradley Jenkins monologued from the front seat, acting as both judge and jury. "You guys always think you're so smart with your articulable suspicion garbage," Bradley mocked, glancing at Arthur in the rearview mirror. "Watch a couple of YouTube videos and suddenly you're constitutional lawyers. Well, out here in the real world, the badge makes the rules, and in my town, you don't talk back." Arthur remained entirely silent. He focused his gaze out the window, watching the expensive boutiques and tree-lined streets roll by. He was memorizing badge numbers, patrol car numbers, and plotting the exact timeline of events. "Not so chatty now, are we?" Bradley taunted. "Reality setting in?" Toby gripped the door handle tightly, wishing he were anywhere else. "Brad, seriously, maybe we should just write him a citation for whatever, and let him go at the station. We don't have body cam footage of him casing the place." "We don't need body cams to prove he was being combative, Toby. My word is gold with the captain," Bradley scoffed. They arrived at the precinct, a modern brick-and-glass building that looked more like a corporate office than a police station. Bradley hauled Arthur out of the back of the cruiser by his chained arms, earning a sharp wince from Arthur that he quickly suppressed. Bradley marched him through the double-glass doors and into the bustling booking area. Phones were ringing, a few officers were typing at their desks, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. At the elevated front desk sat Sergeant Miller, an older, heavy-set man nearing retirement who looked perpetually bored. He looked down over his reading glasses as Bradley paraded Arthur up to the counter. "Morning, Brad. What do we have here?" Miller asked, pulling a blank booking sheet toward him. "Got a live one, Sarge," Bradley said loudly, puffing out his chest. "Arthur Pendleton. Found him casing the businesses on Elmwood. Refused to provide ID initially, got combative, refused a lawful order, and physically resisted detention." Toby stood a few feet away, staring at the floor, absolutely mortified by the string of casual perjury pouring out of his training officer's mouth. Miller sighed, picking up a pen. "Any injuries to officers?" "No, I handled him," Bradley bragged. Miller looked at Arthur. "All right, Mr. Pendleton, we're going to inventory your pockets, take your prints, and put you in a holding cell. You'll see a magistrate in the morning." Arthur looked directly at the desk sergeant. His voice, when he finally spoke, was so calm, so devoid of the usual panic or anger seen in arrested individuals, that it made Miller pause. "Sergeant Miller," Arthur said clearly, ensuring his voice carried across the quiet booking room. "I am informing you that Officer Jenkins has just filed a false verbal report. I was sitting in my vehicle drinking coffee. I provided my identification immediately upon request. I was ordered out of my vehicle without probable cause, assaulted, and arrested without merit. I request that you secure all dash-cam footage from Officer Jenkins' vehicle immediately before it is accidentally deleted." The room went dead silent. 2 officers at nearby desks stopped typing. Bradley stepped forward, pointing a finger in Arthur's face. "You shut your mouth. You're a criminal sitting in my jail. You don't make demands." Miller frowned, looking from the furious Bradley to the unnervingly calm Arthur. He had dealt with thousands of suspects. Usually they were screaming, crying, or fighting. This man was talking like a lawyer dictating a memo. "Brad, calm down," Miller muttered. He turned back to Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton, you can argue your case to the judge. Right now, empty your pockets." "My hands are cuffed behind my back," Arthur pointed out reasonably. "Right," Miller grunted. "Brad, uncuff him. Let him empty his pockets, then put him in holding cell 3. Bradley snatched his keys and roughly unlocked the cuffs. Arthur brought his arms forward, rubbing his bruised wrists slowly. He reached into his pants pockets, placing his keys, some loose change, and a pack of gum on the counter. "Everything," Bradley ordered. "Jacket pockets, too." Arthur paused. He looked at Bradley, then at Miller. "Sergeant, before I empty my jacket pockets, I would like to exercise my right to a phone call, immediately." "You get a call after you're booked," Bradley snapped. "Actually," Miller corrected, a stickler for procedure when the room was quiet enough for everyone to hear. "He can make a call while I run his prints. Go ahead, use the wall phone." Arthur walked slowly over to the heavy metal phone bolted to the cinderblock wall. He picked up the receiver and dialed a Washington, D.C. area code from memory. Bradley leaned against the desk, smirking at Toby. Probably calling his public defender, or his mummy to come post bail. Arthur stood with his back to the room. The phone rang twice before it was picked up on a highly secure, encrypted line at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. "Graves," a sharp voice answered. It was Special Agent in Charge Simon Graves, Arthur's right-hand man and the acting director of the task force, while Arthur was on leave. "Simon," Arthur said quietly, his tone shifting instantly from civilian suspect to commanding officer. "It's Arthur." "Director Pendleton," Simon replied, his tone immediately respectful. "I thought you were off the grid until Thursday for the graduation. Is everything all right?" "There has been a slight change of plans," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the precinct wall. "I've encountered a delay in Oak Ridge. I am currently standing in the booking area of the Oak Ridge Police Department." There was a 3-second pause on the line. "Sir, are you visiting the local precinct?" "No, Simon. I am currently under arrest." Another pause, this one heavy with confusion and rising alarm. "Under arrest?" "Sir, on what charges?" "Fictitious ones," Arthur replied smoothly. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. The arresting officer is a Bradley Jenkins. He's aggressive, legally illiterate, and actively fabricating a report." The sound of a chair violently scraping across a floor echoed through the phone line. "Director, this is unacceptable. I am dispatching the regional field office immediately. We will have the local special agent in charge pull you out of there in 20 minutes. "Negative, Simon," Arthur commanded softly. "Do not pull me out just yet. If they do this to me, they do this to the citizens of this town every day. This department needs a thorough audit, starting from the top down. Here are my orders." Arthur quietly rattled off a series of instructions. Bradley, watching from across the room, saw Arthur whispering into the phone and laughed. "Look at him," Bradley mocked, "begging for a bailout." Arthur finished his instructions. "Have them assemble outside. Nobody breaches the building until I give the signal. Understand?" "Understood, Director. We are initiating a Code Alpha response. The Seattle Field Office Rapid Deployment Team is spinning up now. God help those local cops, sir." "Just get it done, Simon," Arthur said, and hung up the phone. He turned back to face the room, his face an emotionless mask. He walked back to the counter where Bradley and Sergeant Miller were waiting. "Get your lawyer sorted out?" Bradley sneered. "I made my arrangements," Arthur said. He then reached into the inner breast pocket of his grey hoodie. "Hey, hands where I can see them," Bradley barked, his hand dropping to his gun again. Arthur slowly withdrew his hand. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a heavy, black leather bifold wallet. It wasn't his civilian wallet. He tossed it onto the booking counter with a heavy thud. It landed directly on top of the blank police report Bradley was supposed to fill out. The leather flipped open upon impact. Gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct, pinned next to a federal identification card with Arthur's face and an incredibly high clearance level, was a solid gold badge. The eagle of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stared up at the room. Below it, embossed in gold lettering, read, "Deputy Director, National Security Branch." Sergeant Miller's breath hitched in his throat. He stopped breathing entirely. He stared at the gold badge, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. Toby Harrison felt his knees go weak. He had to grab the edge of a nearby desk to stay upright. Bradley Jenkins stared at the badge. For 3 long seconds, his brain completely refused to process what his eyes were seeing. "What? What is this?" Bradley stammered, his arrogant sneer faltering, replaced by a deep, sudden dread. "Is this a fake? You got a fake badge?" Arthur Pendleton leaned over the counter, the quiet, compliant civilian completely gone, replaced by a man who commanded legions. "Officer Jenkins," Arthur said, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You are about to have the worst day of your entire miserable life." The silence in the Oak Ridge precinct was absolute, ringing in the ears of every officer present like the aftermath of a flashbang grenade. The only sound was the low, persistent hum of the overhead air conditioning unit and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Sergeant Miller's hand hovered inches from the heavy leather wallet resting on his booking log. He didn't dare touch it. He leaned in just enough to read the embossed gold lettering again, praying his aging eyes were playing a cruel trick on him. Deputy Director, National Security Branch. A bead of cold sweat broke out on Miller's forehead, tracing a slow path down his temple. He looked up at Arthur Pendleton, the man who, just moments ago, had been a faceless suspect to be processed and forgotten, had transformed into an immovable mountain of federal authority. "Brad," Miller whispered, his voice cracking violently. "Brad, what have you done?" Officer Bradley Jenkins let out a nervous, breathy chuckle that sounded entirely unhinged. He aggressively pointed a thick finger at the wallet. "It's a fake, Sarge. Come on, look at him. You think the Deputy Director of the FBI is driving a rented Ford Taurus and drinking coffee on Elmwood. It's a Halloween prop. I'm tagging him for impersonating a federal officer, too." Arthur didn't blink. He reached out with terrifying slowness, picking up the wallet. He flipped it open toward Miller. "Sergeant, there is a QR code on the back of the identification card. Scan it with your department-issued terminal. It links directly to the Department of Justice verified database. Do it now." Miller swallowed hard. His hands shook as he grabbed the barcode scanner attached to his computer. He pulled the trigger, sweeping the red laser across the back of Arthur's ID. The precinct computer chirped. The screen blinked, bypassing the standard local criminal database, and immediately brought up a secure, encrypted federal portal. A high-resolution photograph of Arthur Pendleton filled the monitor. Below it, in bold, flashing green text, were the words, Clearance level. Top secret. /SCI. Active. Status. Deputy Director. NSB. Flag. Immediate notification to OIG upon detention. Miller practically collapsed backward into his rolling chair, the scanner dropping from his hand and clattering noisily against the linoleum floor. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a blue uniform. It's real," Miller gasped, looking at Bradley with a mixture of horror and profound rage. "You idiot! You absolute, colossal idiot! You just arrested the Deputy Director of the FBI." Toby Harrison, the rookie, slid down the side of a nearby filing cabinet until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. His career was over. His life was over. He was an accessory to the kidnapping of a federal executive. No, wait," Bradley stammered, stepping back, his hands raised as if trying to physically push reality away. He was resisting. He didn't tell me who he was. If he was a Fed, he should have flashed the badge at the window. This is on him. He baited me. I am under no legal obligation to identify myself as a federal agent to avoid an unlawful arrest by a local municipal officer, Arthur stated, his voice ringing with absolute, clinical precision. Your lack of probable cause, your immediate escalation to physical violence, and your subsequent falsification of charges were entirely your own operational choices, Officer Jenkins. The heavy wooden door to the precinct captain's office suddenly swung open. Chief of Police Robert Sterling, a polished, politically savvy man who spent more time on the golf course with the mayor than on the streets, stepped out. He had heard the shouting. "What is going on out here?" Chief Sterling demanded, adjusting his tie. "Miller, why is it so loud in the booking area?" Miller couldn't speak. He just shakily pointed a finger at the computer monitor, and then at Arthur. Sterling marched over, annoyed. He glanced at the monitor. He stopped walking. His jaw literally dropped. He looked at the screen, looked at the man in the faded grey hoodie, standing calmly at his booking counter, and felt his stomach plummet into his shoes. Sterling was a politician. He instantly recognized the apocalyptic magnitude of the situation. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was the kind of event that resulted in federal consent decrees, dismantled police departments, and prison sentences for command staff. "Director Pendleton," Chief Sterling said, his voice instantly transforming into a panicked, placating purr. He shoved Bradley roughly out of the way. "Sir, my profound apologies. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding, a terrible lapse in judgment by a subordinate." "Chief Sterling, I presume?" Arthur asked evenly. "Yes, sir. Robert Sterling. Please let me get you a coffee. Come into my office. We are wiping this entirely from the record. You are free to go, immediately. Officer Jenkins will be severely disciplined, I assure you." Sterling reached out as if to guide Arthur by the arm, desperate to get him out of the public booking area. Arthur didn't move an inch. He looked down at Sterling's hand until the chief nervously withdrew it. "I am not going anywhere, Chief Sterling," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. "I have been formally detained. I have been physically assaulted, handcuffed, and transported against my will under threat of deadly force. Furthermore, Officer Jenkins has publicly and verbally initiated false charges against me in the presence of 2 witnesses." "Sir, please," Sterling begged, sweat suddenly blooming on his upper lip. "Let's handle this professionally, between agencies. We don't need to—" "We are well past professional courtesy, Chief," Arthur interrupted. "If I walk out that door, you will suspend Officer Jenkins for a week with pay, sweep the dashcam footage into a digital incinerator, and go back to terrorizing the citizens of Oak Ridge who don't have gold badges to protect them. No, I want the booking process completed." Sterling looked like he was going to vomit. "Sir." I want you to formally book me. I want Officer Jenkins to put his fabricated narrative in writing, under penalty of perjury. And then I am going to sit on that wooden bench," Arthur pointed to the holding area, "and wait." "Wait for what?" Bradley asked, his voice shaking. The bravado was completely gone, replaced by the terror of a bully who had just punched a sleeping bear. Arthur checked the sleek analog watch on his wrist. "For the United States government." The next 20 minutes were agonizing. The atmosphere inside the Oak Ridge Police Department felt less like a workplace, and more like the interior of a submarine descending past its crush depth. Arthur Pendleton sat perfectly straight on the hard wooden bench of the holding pen. He had refused offers of water, coffee, and desperate apologies from Chief Sterling. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, a silent, immovable statue of impending doom. Across the room, Bradley Jenkins was pacing frantically. He had tried to leave the building, claiming he needed air. But Chief Sterling had barked at him to stay put, confiscating Bradley's service weapon and badge in a panic-stricken attempt to show Arthur he was taking action. Bradley looked sick. The reality of federal prison was wrapping its cold hands around his throat. He kept muttering to himself, trying to piece together a defense that didn't exist. Rookie Toby Harrison remained sitting on the floor by the filing cabinet, quietly writing out a meticulous, brutally honest account of the morning's events in his notebook. Toby knew he was collateral damage, but his only chance at avoiding a federal indictment was absolute, unvarnished cooperation. "Director, please," Chief Sterling tried one last time, standing on the other side of the holding pen bars, holding a perfectly clean release form. "If the DOJ gets involved in this, it's going to destroy the department. The media—" "The media is the least of your concerns, Chief," Arthur replied calmly, not looking up. "A police department that operates a rogue precinct fueled by profiling and unconstitutional detentions is a threat to civil liberties. I am merely the catalyst for an audit that is long overdue." Before Sterling could respond, a low, powerful vibration resonated through the floorboards of the precinct. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the synchronized rumbling of massive, high-output engines. Outside the glass doors of the precinct, the bright morning sun was suddenly blocked out. Sergeant Miller stood up, peering over the booking counter. "Chief," he whispered. 4 heavily armored, matte black Chevrolet Suburbans abruptly jumped the curb, parking in a tight, tactical V formation that completely blockaded the precinct's front entrance and the adjacent patrol cars. The vehicles had no markings, save for small, recessed blue and red strobes pulsing intensely in the grilles and windshields. A fifth vehicle, a massive mobile command center tactical truck, roared down the street and violently blocked the rear exit of the precinct, cutting off any avenue of escape. "Oh, God!" Bradley choked out, backing away from the windows. The doors of the SUVs flew open in perfect unison. Over 20 heavily armed federal agents poured out. They were clad in dark olive tactical gear, Kevlar vests emblazoned with massive yellow FBI lettering, and carried short-barreled rifles resting precisely on their slings. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency that made the local Oak Ridge cops look like children playing dress-up. Leading the charge was Special Agent in Charge David Reynolds. Reynolds was a tall, imposing man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes like cracked ice. He was the head of the Seattle field office, and he looked incredibly angry. Reynolds didn't bother opening the glass doors. 2 tactical agents stepped forward, slammed a heavy breaching ram against the lock, and the double doors shattered inward with a deafening crash, showering the lobby in tempered safety glass. "FBI, nobody move! Hands away from your weapons!" A tactical commander roared, his voice amplified by the enclosed space. The Oak Ridge officers completely froze. Some raised their hands instantly. Others stepped back from their desks, terrified. The sheer overwhelming force of the federal response was paralyzing. Agents flooded the room, instantly securing the perimeter, locking down the exits, and taking positions behind cover. 2 agents immediately flanked the booking counter, leveling their weapons toward the floor, but keeping Sergeant Miller strictly in their sights. David Reynolds strode through the shattered doors, his boots crunching loudly on the glass. He ignored Chief Sterling, who was waving his hands frantically. He ignored the terrified officers. He walked straight toward the holding pen. When Reynolds saw Arthur Pendleton sitting on the bench, locked behind a steel grate, a dangerous muscle feathered in his jaw. "Director," Reynolds said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Agent Reynolds, excellent response time," Arthur noted, finally standing up. Reynolds turned to Chief Sterling, who was trembling so hard his keys were jingling. "Open this cell, right now." Sterling fumbled with his master keys, dropping them twice before finally jamming the right one into the lock. He pulled the heavy barred door open. Arthur stepped out. He didn't stretch. He didn't look relieved. He looked exactly the same as he had when he was sitting in his car drinking coffee, in absolute control. "Are you injured, sir?" Reynolds asked quietly. "Bruised wrists, nothing requiring immediate medical attention," Arthur replied. He turned his gaze across the room, locking eyes with Bradley Jenkins. Bradley was backed against a wall, flanked by 2 heavily armed FBI agents who looked ready to tackle him through the drywall. "The tactical team is securing the building, Director," Reynolds reported. "We have warrants signed by a federal judge 10 minutes ago. We are seizing all servers, physical files, dash cam footage, and personnel records. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is already en route from D.C. "Good," Arthur said. He slowly walked over to where Bradley was standing. The room was deathly quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the terrified local police. Arthur stopped 2 feet in front of Bradley. The bully was gone. In his place was a broken, weeping man. "You thought you were the predator," Arthur said, his voice low, slicing through the quiet room. "You thought this badge gave you the right to hunt people you deemed beneath you. You operated under the delusion that power exists without accountability." Arthur reached out and tapped the empty space on Bradley's chest where his badge used to be. "True power," Arthur continued, "is knowing you can destroy someone, and choosing not to unless absolutely necessary. You had no such restraint, therefore you are no longer fit to hold authority of any kind." Arthur turned to Reynolds. "Agent Reynolds, execute the arrest warrant." David Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a heavy pair of federal restraints from his tactical vest. "Bradley Jenkins," Reynolds boomed, his voice carrying the full weight of the United States government. "You are under arrest for the violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are also being charged with federal kidnapping, aggravated assault, and falsifying official government records." Bradley sobbed openly, his knees buckling. "Please, I have a family. It was a mistake. I didn't know who he was." "That is exactly the point," Arthur said coldly. "If I were a carpenter, or a teacher, or a delivery driver, I would be sitting in a concrete cell right now with ruined wrists and a fabricated criminal record, and you would be bragging to your friends about it. Put him in the car." 2 tactical agents grabbed Bradley by the arms, dragging him to his feet. They hauled him roughly across the precinct, his boots dragging on the floor, and shoved him through the shattered glass doors toward one of the waiting black SUVs. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his tear-streaked face as the heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate. Chief Sterling stepped forward, wiping his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Director Pendleton, please believe me. I had no idea Jenkins was operating like this." This is an isolated incident. I am fully prepared to cooperate. Save it for the grand jury, Chief Sterling, Arthur cut him off. Grand jury? Sterling squeaked, his political veneer crumbling. Arthur gestured to the FBI agents who were already unspooling Ethernet cables and carrying heavy Pelican cases into the server room. Do you really think I authorized a 50-man raid just for one bad patrolman? You don't bring a wrecking ball to kill a termite, Chief. You bring it to level the entire rotten structure. Arthur stepped closer to Sterling, his height and presence dominating the smaller man. I spent my time in your holding cell reviewing digital files pulled by my cyber division, Arthur explained, his voice a low, terrifying hum. We didn't just look at Officer Jenkins. We looked at your entire department. We found the 13 excessive force complaints against Jenkins that you personally buried. We found the targeted traffic stop quotas focusing exclusively on minority drivers entering Oak Ridge. We found the misappropriated forfeiture funds flowing into your precinct's recreational budget. Sterling went pale. He stumbled backward, hitting the booking counter. You hacked my department? I authorized a federal emergency audit, Arthur corrected smoothly. And what we found was a systemic, top-down criminal enterprise operating disguised as a police force. Jenkins was just the symptom. You, Chief Sterling, are the disease. Agent Reynolds stepped up next to Sterling. Robert Sterling, you are also being taken into federal custody. Charges include obstruction of justice, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and official corruption. Hands behind your back. The remaining Oak Ridge officers watched in stunned, absolute silence as their chief of police, a man who had ruled the town with impunity for a decade, was handcuffed and read his rights by federal agents. Arthur watched them march Sterling out. He felt a deep, profound sense of exhaustion wash over him, but also a sharp, satisfying clarity. He turned and saw Toby Harrison still sitting on the floor, clutching his notebook. Arthur walked over to the young rookie. Toby flinched as the deputy director approached. Officer Harrison, Arthur said gently. Toby looked up, his eyes wide and terrified. Sir, I didn't touch you. I tried to tell him to stop. I wrote it all down. Everything he said. Everything he lied about. It's all here. Toby held up the notebook like a shield. Arthur took the notebook, glancing at the meticulous, nervous handwriting. He looked back at Toby. He saw a kid who was in over his head, a kid who had been paralyzed by a toxic culture, but who hadn't completely lost his moral compass. Stand up, son, Arthur ordered softly. Toby scrambled to his feet. You failed to intervene today, Arthur said, his tone stern but not devoid of empathy. When another officer abuses their power, silence is complicity. You wear a badge. Your duty is to the law and the public, not to your training officer's fragile ego. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I know. I was scared of him. Fear is natural. Letting it dictate your duty is unacceptable, Arthur said. He handed the notebook back to Toby. Agent Reynolds will be taking your statement. Be completely honest. Your cooperation today will determine if you ever wear a uniform again. If you survive this audit, I suggest you find a department that values integrity over intimidation. I will, sir. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Arthur simply nodded. He turned away from the terrified rookie and walked toward the center of the shattered precinct. Agents were bustling everywhere. Filing cabinets were being emptied into evidence boxes. Hard drives were being cloned. The corrupt kingdom of the Oak Ridge Police Department was being methodically, brutally dismantled brick by the very system they thought they could manipulate. Agent Reynolds walked up to Arthur, handing him his tablet and the keys to his rental car. Sir, your vehicle has been secured. Your sister called your encrypted line. We informed her you were delayed by a minor traffic incident, but are on your way." Arthur took the keys, a rare, genuine, albeit small smile touching his lips. "Thank you, David. Excellent work today. Leave no stone unturned in this building." "We'll tear it down to the studs, Director," Reynolds promised. Arthur walked out through the shattered glass doors. The morning air was still crisp, but the atmosphere felt entirely different. The fleet of black SUVs sat idling, a stark reminder of the immense, invisible forces that governed the world. He walked past the cruiser, where Bradley Jenkins sat in the back, locked in a cage of his own making, weeping as he watched the deputy director walk free. Arthur got into his blue sedan, started the engine, and finally took a sip of his cold macchiato. It tasted bitter, but the victory was incredibly sweet. He put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the ruins of a corrupt precinct behind him, heading off to his niece's graduation. He was just a quiet man in a grey hoodie, but today he had reminded a town exactly what true justice looked like. 6 months later, the heavy oak doors of the United States District Court in Seattle swung shut, sealing the fate of the men who had once believed they were untouchable. The sweeping federal audit initiated by Arthur Pendleton had unspooled a web of corruption so dense it made national headlines. Investigative journalist Robert Gallagher, who broke the exclusive, deeply researched details of the story for a major media syndicate, called it the most profound, localized abuse of power of the decade. Gallagher's explosive front-page piece, titled "The Predators in Blue: How Oak Ridge Fell," exposed the precise, terrifying mechanisms of the precinct's civil rights violations. He published the leaked quotas, the buried complaints, and the exact transcripts of the dashcam footage the FBI had salvaged from the precinct's servers. The exposé prompted a massive wave of internal affairs investigations across the entire state, creating a domino effect of accountability that turned this local drama into a real-life catalyst for sweeping municipal reform. Bradley Jenkins stood trembling before federal judge Samuel Kensington. He was no longer wearing his tailored pressed uniform or his heavy utility belt. Instead, he wore the shapeless, bright orange jumpsuit of a federal inmate. His wrists, which he had so eagerly and mercilessly used to inflict pain on others, were now bound tightly in heavy steel transport chains. He looked gaunt, stripped of his arrogant sneer, and utterly defeated. "Bradley Jenkins!" Judge Kensington's voice boomed across the silent, packed courtroom. "You used your badge not as a shield for the vulnerable, but as a weapon of intimidation. You preyed on innocent citizens, fabricated evidence to satisfy your own malicious prejudices, and operated under the delusion that your authority was absolute. The hard karma of your actions has finally and permanently caught up with you." The judge brought the wooden gavel down with a deafening crack, sentencing Bradley to 14 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. As federal marshals grabbed Bradley by the arms to lead him away, he didn't fight. He just hung his head and wept. The reality of his new life, a disgraced, convicted cop in a federal prison, crushing whatever was left of his ego. Chief Robert Sterling didn't fare much better. In a desperate bid to save himself, he had attempted to throw his entire command staff under the bus, but the FBI's cyber division had already recovered his deleted emails detailing the misappropriation of funds. Sterling was stripped of his pension, publicly disgraced, and sentenced to 6 years for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The once feared Oak Ridge Police Department was completely disbanded, its duties permanently absorbed by the county sheriff's office under a strict, federally mandated consent decree. As for Toby Harrison, the young rookie took Arthur Pendleton's stern advice to heart. He provided hours of crucial testimony, completely corroborating the FBI's findings and ensuring the convictions stuck. Realizing that the systemic issues in law enforcement required a different kind of fight, Toby resigned from the police force. He used his savings to enroll in law school, determined to become a civil rights attorney who would hold the system accountable from the outside. Back in Washington, D.C., Arthur Pendleton sat in his secure office overlooking the city. He watched a brief news segment on a muted television detailing the final sentencing in Seattle. He didn't smile, nor did he celebrate. For him, this wasn't a game of personal revenge. It was a necessary, surgical correction of a broken system. He took a sip of his black coffee, turned his attention back to the towering stack of national security briefings on his desk, and went back to work. The quiet man in the grey hoodie had spoken, and the world had listened. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't come from a badge or a uniform, but from integrity, accountability, and the courage to do what is right. The hard karma that caught up with Bradley Jenkins proves that no one is untouchable when they abuse their power. If you felt the justice in this incredible, real-life inspired tale of a corrupt system finally being brought to its knees, we nod your support to keep bringing these stories to light. Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family to spread the message that nobody is above the law, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic, and satisfying stories of instant karma and ultimate justice. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.